I still remember the exact moment when the walls of the corner office felt less like a fortress and more like a cage. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the gleaming conference table where I'd spent the last 6 years giving my all. I ran a hand through my silver-streaked chestnut hair and tried to steady my breathing. My name is Marisol Trent. I was known around the office as the Quiet Storm, steady, reliable, and always one step ahead. At 58, I'd poured half my life into Verdant Capital, guiding the pension fund team through market crashes, bull runs, and boardroom battles. Yet here I sat, summoned by my new boss, Jeremy Cole, a fresh-faced MBA who looked barely old enough to have a beard, let alone helm half our division. The door clicked shut behind me, and I forced a smile. "What can I do for you, Jeremy?" He looked up from his tablet with thin lips curving in what he believed was a friendly smirk. "Marisol, thanks for joining me. Please, have a seat." His voice was polite, too polite. I sat, careful not to crease my blazer, and he cleared his throat. "I've been reviewing the team's output, the KPIs, the client satisfaction surveys. You've done wonderful work, truly, but we're charting a new direction for Verdant Capital. We need agility, innovation, and a fresh perspective." My chest tightened. "I'm all in for any new initiatives you propose. I've led dozens of successful projects here." He sighed and tapped his screen. "Part of that new direction involves reshuffling some roles. We feel it's time for a younger face in your position. We're demoting you to a senior analyst role, effective immediately." Silence wrapped around me like a vice. Demoted. Excessively polite words masked a brutal truth. I was too old. My blood ran cold. I'd seen layoffs, heard whispers of ageism before, but I never thought it would happen to me, not after decades of loyalty. I forced calm. "I see. May I ask what prompted this decision?" He shrugged. "It's strategic. Our clients want to see dynamic leadership. I'm sorry, Marisol." I felt something crack inside. Years of dedication reduced to a throwaway line about dynamic leadership. I rose from my seat, legs trembling, and stared at him. "If you think age defines capability, you don't know what you're talking about. I built this pension fund from the ground up." My voice was low, fierce. He blinked, surprised at my fire. "I understand your disappointment, but the decision stands." I left the office without another word. The hallway lights buzzed overhead, the polished floors reflecting my determined stride. I could feel the stares, some sympathetic, some pitying, others masking opportunism. My heart raced, but dread gave way to resolve. Back at my desk, I logged into the portal, saw my new title blinking back at me, Senior Analyst, Tier 2. The sense of betrayal mixed with anger so potent it made my hands shake. Then I remembered my father's words on my 16th birthday, "Never let anyone diminish your worth." I inhaled, closed my eyes, and let his voice ground me, myself the storm, quiet but unstoppable. My mind raced through possibilities. This injustice would not stand. If Verdant Capital thought they could push me aside for someone younger, they hadn't factored in my resourcefulness. Or my network. I opened a fresh document and began to type, "Project Phoenix, Reclaiming Our Value." Notes flew across the screen. Reach out to former clients. Schedule a meeting with the board member who'd once praised my stewardship. Analyze the pension fund's underperforming cohorts. Draft a proposal showing how my leadership could boost returns by at least 4%. As dusk settled outside my window, I realized late nights would become my norm again. Only this time, the fight was personal. My phone buzzed with a message from Aidan Clark, an old colleague at Redwood Investments. "Heard about the shakeup. You okay? Call me." I dialed, voice steady over the line. "I'm better than okay. I'm getting my job back. On my terms." His laugh crackled through the receiver. "That's the Marisol I know. Let's talk strategy tomorrow." I hung up and gazed out at the city skyline. The lights glittered like a promise. Opportunity hidden in the dark. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Aidan's voice stayed with me long after I'd hung up. I sat alone in my flat, the low hum of the city night filtering through my open window, carrying the scent of rain on concrete. The pension fund files lay scattered on my dining table, pages bristling with tabs, highlighter marks, and furious notes in the margins. I'd built these portfolios like they were my own family, and now they'd become my weapon. At dawn, I forced myself into a crisp suit and walked into Verdant Capital as if my world hadn't cracked open the day before. I smiled at the receptionist, who offered me a hesitant, pitying look. Let them pity me for now. They wouldn't see what was coming until it was too late. I spent the morning acting like the demotion was just another pivot in my career. I responded to emails, reran client risk assessments, nodded politely at the junior analysts who didn't know whether to congratulate or console me. But by noon, I was in the back stairwell, phone pressed to my ear. "Marisol, what you're talking about isn't a small play," Aiden said, his tone low but edged with that trademark thrill of a man who lived for the impossible. "Buying out a portion of Verdant's pension fund means you'd have to convince at least 30% of stakeholders that you can manage it better than the company that built it." "I don't just want a portion, Aiden. I want the whole thing, all of it." He was silent for a moment, then let out a soft whistle. "You've lost your mind." "No, I'm finally using it." When I hung up, I looked down the stairwell's concrete steps, each one a marker between who I'd been and who I'd have to become. It wasn't going to be easy. Verdant's board was old money, powerful families, tight-fisted with trust. But they were conservative, risk-averse. If I could prove the current leadership was driving the pension fund towards underperformance, I might just pry it loose. Back at my desk, I dug into the quarterly reports. Jeremy's team had pivoted some of our safest retirement portfolios into higher-risk instruments to juice short-term gains. I knew the board hated unnecessary risk. If I could show them that the pensioners' long-term security was on the line, they'd listen. I stayed late that night, the entire floor dark, except for the halo of my desk lamp. The numbers spoke to me in ways they never did to Jeremy. While he chased performance bonuses, I'd always played the long game. Solid, patient, dependable growth. By midnight, I'd pieced together a strategy. I'd need allies, capital, and a way to prove that this too-old woman still knew how to win. At 3 in the morning, I emailed Aiden a file titled Ironclad. It was the blueprint for my coup, a buyout funded by private equity partners who valued security over flash. I was banking on my reputation, my decades of relationships, and the fact that the people who'd retire on this money would trust me over a reckless child in a tailored suit. The next day, I took an early train to Surrey to meet someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Louisa Bennett, the chairwoman of the Employee Pensioners Trust. She greeted me in her rose garden, her hair pinned in a tight bun, her hands speckled with soil. "Marisol Trent, the last time we spoke, you told me never to call you again." She wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to a wrought iron bench. "Sit, tell me what brings you crawling back." I didn't flinch. "They're gutting the fund. The leadership is shifting too much into volatile holdings, and it's only going to get worse. You know the people who've given their lives to Verdant. Do you trust that they'll have a pension in 10 years? Her eyes narrowed, studying me the way she did when I was a 28-year-old junior analyst, with something to prove. "And you think you can do better?" "I know I can, and I need your endorsement. You get the trust on my side, the others will follow." Louisa leaned back, the roses framing her head like a crown of thorns. "And if you fail?" "I won't." My voice was steel. "Because I'm not doing this for ego or for some bonus. I'm doing it because it's right." Louisa tapped her finger against her knee. "All right. I'll arrange a meeting with the trust. But know this, if you betray their faith, they'll ruin you." I wouldn't expect anything less. As I rode the train back to the city, the rain smeared the landscape into a gray blur. I felt my pulse thrum with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just fighting to save my job anymore. I was fighting to prove that experience, loyalty, and integrity still mattered. When I stepped off the train, my phone buzzed with a text from Aiden. "Our friends at Redwood are in. They'll back you if you get the trust." I smiled. Step by step, the storm gathered force. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom with a fresh presentation. Jeremy was already there, flanked by his loyal lieutenants. His smirk faltered when he saw me. "Marisol, this isn't your meeting," he said, voice clipped. I placed my binder on the table. the slap echoing through the hush. "It is now." I turned to the board members, my gaze steady. "You're about to see why the people you're supposed to protect trust me more than anyone in this room." And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. The room felt charged, the air vibrating with something electric as I flicked through the slides. Charts showing the fund's exposure to risky assets, projections that spelled out the inevitable losses, and my plan to buy the pension out, protect the retirees, and return the fund to stable growth. One of the older directors, a hawk-eyed man named Franklin Gray, leaned forward. "You'd need backing to make this happen." I nodded. "I have it. Private equity, Redwood Investments, the trust." Jeremy looked pale. "This is ridiculous. She's been demoted. She doesn't have the authority." I cut him off. "Authority? I have it where it counts, the people's trust." The room erupted in debate. I watched Jeremy squirm as I outlined the steps, the safeguards, the way I'd reinvest in community bonds and sustainable assets that would outperform his reckless gambles in the long run. By the time I stepped out of that boardroom, the corridors were buzzing with whispers. Some called me crazy, others bold. I didn't care. For the first time in days, my reflection in the polished elevator doors looked like the woman I'd almost forgotten, Marisol Trent, the quiet storm. But storms are never quiet for long, and this one had just begun to roar. The morning after my impromptu showdown in the boardroom, the city felt different. I rose before dawn, a mug of black coffee warming my hands as I watched the sun rise over the river. For years I'd followed the same pattern. Up at 6, at my desk by 7. Meetings, numbers, polite nods, careful words. But that routine was gone now, burned to ash the moment Jeremy called me too old. What he didn't know was that in setting that fire, he'd freed me. By 8, I was back in my flat, my living room transformed into mission control. Charts, investor portfolios, lists of pensioner names and numbers, sticky notes on the wall. My mind was a hive of data points, connections, and leverage. In the middle of it all was my laptop, its webcam blinking. Aiden's face flickered on the screen, pale in the morning light. "You're trending," he said with a crooked grin. "Someone leaked the boardroom showdown. You're the talk of the forums. Verdant's matriarch, they're calling you." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help the grin tugging at my lips. "Good, let them talk. It keeps the pressure on Jeremy." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Listen, Redwood's confirmed they'll float 20% of the buyout if you get the trust, and at least another 15% stakeholder commitment. That means you need Louise's vote, plus 2 more on the board." I ran my fingers along the rim of my mug. "I'll get them." "Marisol, this isn't a gentle game of chess anymore. This is bare knuckle. They'll dig, they'll smear, they'll try to prove you're unstable." I lifted my chin. "Let them. I'm not hiding." When the call ended, I sank into my chair. My eyes fell on a photograph framed on my mantel. My father, arms folded over his mechanic's jumpsuit, grinning, grease smeared on his cheek. "Never let them see you bend," he'd told me. I whispered it back to him now. "I won't, Dad. I promise." By lunchtime, I was standing outside a glass tower on Bishopsgate, a deep blue folder under my arm. Inside was everything I'd need to convince my next ally, Dominic Webb, one of the longest-serving board members, the kind who still wore pocket squares and believed in handshakes over emails. He'd always respected my work. If I could make him see the danger in Jeremy's recklessness, he'd sway the old guard. He greeted me in a private club lounge that smelled faintly of polished wood and old money. "Marisol, to what do I owe this surprise?" I wasted no time. "Dominic, you've seen the portfolio allocations. You know this is a gamble Verdant can't afford." His eyes narrowed behind his gold-rimmed glasses. "That may be true, but I can't back your bid without assurances. You're asking me to throw my lot in with you against the board." "You'd be throwing your lot in with the people you claim to serve, the pensioners, Dominic. They trust me. They'll pull out if they see Jeremy treating their future like a game of roulette." He drummed his fingers on the table, eyes darting to the waitstaff as if they might overhear. "You're risking your entire reputation on this." "No," I said softly. "I'm betting it, and I've never lost a bet I was willing to die on." His lips twitched. "Dramatic as ever, Marisol." "True." but you know I'm right. He leaned back, folding his napkin with meticulous care. You get Louisa, you get the trust's blessing, and I'll back you. But if you fail, I won't fail. He nodded, almost reluctant. Then you have my word. One more piece on the board. I stepped back into the drizzle, phone pressed to my ear, coordinating with Aiden to finalize Redwood's terms. Make introductions to a secondary group of smaller investors who might add another 5% to my war chest. It was dusk when I caught the first sign of trouble. My work email pinged with a staff wellness check request, HR, wanting to know if I was coping well with the transition. The polite wording was a mask. They wanted a paper trail, an excuse to paint me as unstable. Classic corporate move. I typed my response carefully. Thank you for your concern. I am well within my performance targets and have no need for additional support. Then I forwarded the email to Aiden. They're baiting me. His reply came seconds later. Keep receipts, always. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the storm lash the windows. My mind wouldn't rest. Flashes of old board meetings, deals closed over midnight calls, my father's laughter when I'd bring him coffee in the garage. The pensioners' names swam in my mind, faces I'd met at town halls, the letters I'd received when their kids graduated college, because my portfolio had kept tuition paid. They weren't numbers on a balance sheet to me, they were people, they were my people. Sleep claimed me just before dawn, but it didn't last long. By 7, I was back in the office. Hair tied back, eyes sharp. The open floor plan felt like a minefield. Junior staff whispering, Jeremy's cronies pretending not to watch as I sat up in the corner. Let them watch. Let them see what too old looked like when it refused to die quietly. By mid-afternoon, I was standing in the pensioners' trust offices, a worn conference room filled with people who'd given decades to Verdant. Louisa sat at the head, her gaze pinning me like a hawk. You asked for this meeting, she said. Make it worth our time. I took a breath. Verdant's pension fund is at risk because its leadership is chasing short-term gains at the expense of long-term security. You trusted me for 30 years because I never gambled with your futures. I'm asking you to trust me again, only this time, I want you to let me buy the fund outright. Murmurs filled the room. One man, a retired foreman, raised his voice. You're asking us to cut the cord. If you fail, we lose everything. I met his eyes. If I walk away, you'll lose it anyway. Not today, not next month, but soon enough. They don't see you as people, they see you as liabilities. Louisa's stare softened by a fraction. What would you do differently? No more high-risk derivatives, community investments, stable infrastructure bonds, ESG portfolios that outlast trends, and profit sharing. If the fund overperforms, every single pensioner sees that money back in their pocket. Silence. Then Louisa stood. You'll have our vote. It took everything in me not to sag with relief. Thank you. As I walked out into the London rain, I called Aiden. Louisa's in, Dominic's in, Redwood is solid. We're close. He was quiet for a beat. Then brace yourself. Jeremy's going to hit back. And it won't be subtle. I turned my face up to the storm. Good. Let him. I was born for storms. The next morning, my company email was locked. Security badges revoked. My desk, boxed and waiting in the lobby. And a letter on top. You are hereby terminated for insubordination and breach of company trust. Jeremy's final move. But he forgot one thing. The people who made this company trusted me more than they feared him. I tucked the letter into my purse, walked outside, and dialed Louisa. Ready to light the match? Her voice was sharp as flint. Ready when you are, Marisol. They thought they'd buried me under that termination letter. What they didn't know was that they'd just cleared my last chain. As I stepped out into the chill morning air, box of my so-called personal effects in my hands. A tight, defiant smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I wasn't fired, I was free. No more inside politics. No more pretending not to see their games. Now I could bring the storm. The first call I made was to Aiden. Jeremy pulled my badge. I'm officially out. He was quiet for a moment. And how do you feel? I looked up at the steel and glass facade of Verdant Capital's headquarters. It was slick, and modern and utterly empty of the soul that used to bind it together. Lighter than I have in years. I'm going to my lawyer now. The trust is ready. It's time we talk numbers. By noon, I was sitting in a conference room at a boutique law firm I'd used when I refinanced my flat a decade ago. I knew they were small but discreet, and I needed people who valued loyalty over headlines. Mrs. Carr, my solicitor, scanned the stack of papers I'd brought. So you're telling me you want to execute a full-scale employee pension fund buyout. You do realize you'll be poking a very big bear? I don't care if the bear bites. I care that the people who gave their lives to this company don't get left in the cold while Jeremy pads his pockets. She removed her glasses and set them down with a soft clink. Then let's get started. The next 72 hours blurred into an endless carousel of calls, strategy sessions, and private meetings. Redwood's lawyers wanted guarantees on the new governance structure. Aiden handled that. Dominic vouched for me to the conservative old guard. Louisa and the Pensioners' Trust lined up statements of support, ready to broadcast them when the time came. Meanwhile, Jeremy didn't stay quiet. The first hit piece appeared in a mid-tier finance blog. Anonymous sources accusing me of manipulative tactics and erratic behavior. I read it over my morning coffee, barely suppressing a laugh. If that was the best he had, he was already on the back foot. But the bigger blow came when my bank flagged unusual activity on my accounts. A routine audit triggered a temporary freeze on my personal funds. I knew Jeremy's reach. I knew exactly what this was. Intimidation. He wanted me to panic, to feel the pinch. Instead, I called Aiden. We accelerate the timeline. Tell Redwood we're going public with the offer in 48 hours. You're sure? I was sure the moment he called me too old. That night I barely slept. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, the glow of my laptop illuminating spreadsheets and legal drafts. My father's old mug, cracked handle, oil stains etched into its ceramic, sat beside me, filled with black coffee. I remembered how he used to nurse it through endless nights in his garage, hands raw, mind humming with ideas. I was his daughter through and through. By sunrise, the pension fund buyout proposal was final. Redwood would commit the initial capital. Louisa's trust would hold the governance seat. Dominic's endorsement secured the credibility we needed. All that remained was to show the people, the pensioners, the employees, the retirees, that they had a choice. I called in every favor I'd ever banked. A press release drafted. Independent pensioners rallied to speak on camera about my record. By noon, my name was trending again, this time as the pension protector. The nickname made me smile. They'd meant it mockingly, but I embraced it. Better to be known for protecting people than for gutting them dry. Jeremy hit back fast. His team put out statements questioning my mental state. They leaked selected emails, harmless correspondence that they twisted to imply instability. But the people who mattered saw through it. They knew me. They knew the truth. When I stepped onto the steps outside Verdant Capital with the press behind their barricades, I felt no fear. The pensioners stood at my back, Louisa beside me, Dominic off to the side, arms folded, eyes flinty. "This is your moment, Marisol," Louisa murmured. I faced the cameras. "My name is Marisol Trent. For 30 years, I managed Verdant Capital's pension fund with one goal: to protect the futures of the people who built this company. That trust was broken when leadership decided they knew better than decades of proven stewardship. So today, I'm offering every pensioner, every retiree, every employee a choice. Your future in the hands of executives who see you as numbers, or in the hands of someone who sees you as people." Flashes went off like fireworks. I kept going. This isn't about me. It's about all of us who've been told we're too old, too slow, too stuck in our ways. I'm not stepping aside. I'm stepping up. Behind me, Louisa handed out pamphlets detailing the terms: clear, transparent, fair. The more people saw, the more they murmured. Some of the younger staff still hesitated. They'd never known anything but the corporate ladder. But the pensioners? The ones who'd called me after their grandkids were born, who sent me Christmas cards every year? They stood in line to sign their support. Jeremy's team pushed back, claiming I was violating non-compete clauses. Mrs. Carr had anticipated this. The fine print of my original contract gave me the right to act as a private fiduciary if I could demonstrate a breach of trust by the employer. And Jeremy's gamble-heavy pivot was exactly that. The next day, headlines read, "Pension Revolt, Ex-Executive Mounts Historic Buyout." Some outlets mocked me. Others treated me like a curiosity. But the pensioners didn't care about headlines. They cared about their future. Each day, my living room turned into a war room. Volunteers took calls, fielded questions, printed forms. Dominic ran interference with the board, stalling Jeremy's attempts to push an emergency injunction. One night, just after midnight, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a small group of former Verdant janitorial staff, hard hats in hand, eyes wide with hope. "Miss Trent, we just wanted you to know. We're with you. Whatever happens, you've got us." I didn't cry often, but that night I did, quietly, while they sat with me over cheap tea and biscuits. In that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about my pride. It was about their dignity. When the final vote came, we held it in a rented hall in the East End. Folding chairs filled with pensioners, retirees, and employees who'd come to see if the rumors were true. Jeremy tried to crash the meeting, stood at the back, arms crossed, glaring. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The people's eyes said enough. They'd seen behind the polished veneer. They knew who he was. Louisa took the floor. "We've heard from both sides. Now we decide." She held up the paper ballots. "You know what's at stake. Vote your conscience." I held my breath as the boxes filled. Whispers, nods, murmurs of encouragement. Some still looked uncertain. But when the final count came in, Louisa turned to me, eyes bright. "It's done, Marisol. They're yours." I exhaled, trembling. Jeremy turned on his heel and left without a word. I didn't watch him go. He was a footnote now. I stepped up to the microphone, my voice raw but steady. "Thank you. Thank you for trusting me. I swear to you, I will guard your future like it's my own." Outside, the night air tasted like freedom. The quiet storm had come and gone. And in its wake, it had cleared the path for something new, something better, something that no one would ever again dare to call too old. The hall emptied out slowly that night, footsteps echoing on the scuffed parquet floor. But I stayed rooted where I was. My hands rested on the edge of the makeshift podium, a battered table we'd borrowed from the community center next door. Ballot papers lay scattered like snowdrifts, marked with trembling signatures that meant trust, belief, and an open door I could not slam shut, even if I wanted to. When Louisa hugged me, her coat smelled faintly of roses and old books. "You did it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They chose you, Marisol." I pulled back just enough to see the lines of worry etched deep into her face, softened now with relief. "I know," I said, my voice hoarse, "but this is just the start." In the corner, Aiden leaned against the exit sign, his phone lighting up every few seconds with new pings. "The press is calling this a David and Goliath story," he said. "They want interviews, sound bites. The pensioners want statements too." "They'll get them," I murmured, "but not tonight. Tonight, I just want to stand in this room and remember what it feels like to win something worth fighting for." Louisa nodded. "Take tonight. Tomorrow, we fight again." I left the hall with my coat wrapped tight around me, the winter wind slicing through the quiet East End street. My old car, a sensible silver sedan with a cracked heater, was parked beneath a flickering lamppost. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I turned the key, listening to the engine's familiar cough, letting the warmth of it remind me that I was still here, still standing. The next morning, I found my flat transformed. Dominic had arranged a short-term operations space, a rented co-working suite downtown that would serve as the headquarters for the new pensioners fund. When I arrived, volunteers were already setting up folding tables, laptops, printers. Posters lined the wall. "Your future, your hands." People offered coffee, shook my hand, pressed me with questions about the transition plan. One old colleague from my early years, Gwen, brought pastries and tears in her eyes. "Marisol, you saved my father's pension once when the markets crashed. He always said you'd watch over us." I squeezed her hand. "We watch over each other, Gwen. That's how this works." Within hours, the first signatures for the fund's transfer rolled in. Redwood's money hit the escrow account that afternoon. Louisa's trust finalized the governance charter, giving the pensioners a binding seat at the table for every decision. No more backroom deals. No more fresh faces chasing risky short-term spikes while calling people like me obsolete. But even in this fragile triumph, Jeremy lurked like a shadow in the corners. He filed an emergency injunction to freeze Redwood's contribution, citing, quote, fraudulent coercion and, quote, misuse of proprietary data. Mrs. Carr and her team shot it down with a flurry of counterfilings, citing decades of precedent. Still, the threat was there, an unspoken warning that he would drag this through the courts if he couldn't destroy it outright. That night, I found myself at my tiny kitchen table, spreadsheets spread out beneath the glow of a single bulb. Aiden's voice came through the speaker, low and rough with exhaustion. "How are you holding up?" "Like an old car in the cold," I said, laughing quietly. "I still run, but every part of me creaks." He snorted. "Well, you're the best damn engine I've ever seen." I looked down at the column of numbers. Redwood's funding covered the transition. But once the new fund was operational, we'd need to beat the projections within a year to prove to the pensioners and the entire industry that we weren't just rebels playing house. I traced the rows with my pen. We'll need to restructure the asset portfolio. Pull out of risky derivatives, move back into community bonds, sustainable housing, maybe small local green projects that generate stable returns. "You're going to rebuild this thing from scratch," Aiden said softly, "just like you did 30 years ago." I closed my eyes and saw my father's garage. The smell of oil, the rattle of old tools, the hum of possibility. "Yeah," I whispered, "just like that." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Morning brought a flood of calls. Some from reporters who wanted me on camera, some from retirees offering to volunteer, some from clients of Verdant who now wondered if they could move their personal investments to our new fund. Word spread fast. What started as a rebellion was becoming a beacon. Louisa pulled me aside in the makeshift break room. "Be ready," she said. "Jeremy's not done. He'll try to discredit you in any way he can." I nodded. "Let him try. We'll meet him at every turn." But I was not prepared for how personal the next strike would be. 2 days later, a thin envelope arrived at my flat. No return address. Inside was a grainy photocopy of an old performance review, one from decades ago when I'd taken a medical leave after my father died. Scrawled in red pen, "Concerns about emotional stability." I laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was so obvious. Jeremy had gone digging for anything that could paint me as unstable. Aiden was furious. "He's grasping at ghosts. This won't stick." "No," I said, "but it plants doubt, and doubt is all he needs." The next day, the blogs ran with it. "Pension protector or liability?" one headline blared. "Sources suggest decades of erratic behavior." I recognized one of the so-called sources, a junior analyst I'd fired years ago for stealing client data. "He'll burn through everything to keep power," I said to Louisa as we sat across from each other in the dim co-working space. "He'll torch his own house before he lets someone else live in it." She reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. "Then we let him. Sometimes the fire burns the poison out." So we pushed back. Hard. We held community meetings, streamed Q&A sessions online. Pensioners stood with me on camera, telling their stories, how we'd saved their retirements, their homes, their families. No PR team could fake that kind of loyalty. Each night I sat in my flat, the hum of the city drifting in through cracked windows, the echo of my father's voice in my head. "It's not the engine that keeps you moving, Marisol," he used to say. "It's the grit in your hands and the fire in your chest." By the end of the week, the final legal hurdle fell away. Redwood's money cleared, the trust signed the final papers. The pensioners' fund was now officially independent, ours to run, ours to guard. On the day the papers were filed, Dominic came to see me. He brought a single rose from his garden and laid it on my desk. "You did it," he said. "You took everything they said made you weak and turned it into your armor." I smiled. "Let's not get sentimental yet, Dominic. We still have to prove this works." He chuckled. "You always did hate a victory lap." "I don't need a lap," I said. "I need a road that never ends." Outside, the wind rattled the window panes. The storm wasn't over. It had only changed course, and this time, I was the one steering it. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The ink was barely dry on the final papers when the real work began. Owning the pension fund meant nothing if we couldn't grow it. If we couldn't prove that this rebel collective of retirees, ex-employees, and one so-called too-old woman could outdo the corporate machine that once dismissed us. I stood at the center of our borrowed office space, the hum of laptops and low murmur of volunteers filling the air. Flyers were stacked high, phones rang with questions from pensioners wanting updates, and on the far wall, I'd taped up a massive chart. Our growth plan, scribbled in thick marker like a war map. Aiden slumped onto a folding chair, sleeves rolled up, tie loose around his neck. If I'd known this is what retirement looked like, I'd have stayed at Redwood. I handed him a cup of terrible instant coffee. You knew exactly what you were getting into. No backing out now. He grinned. Wouldn't dream of it. We spent the next 72 hours buried in strategy. Every penny we'd secured from Redwood and smaller partners had to stretch: community housing bonds, green energy investments, local businesses with solid long-term projections. No more chasing shiny derivatives. No more gambling with people's futures. Meanwhile, Jeremy hadn't gone quiet. Rumors spread like oil on water, that I was in over my head, that I'd run the fund into the ground. One morning, I opened my email to find a news alert. Whispers of bankruptcy, pensioners at risk. The article was a hit job, thinly sourced but designed to rattle the retirees. Louisa barged into my makeshift office, eyes flashing. We need to hit back. They're scared. You should see the calls coming in. I looked up from my spreadsheets. Let them be scared. For a minute. Then we show them what we're made of. We hosted town halls in musty church basements and crowded union halls, anywhere people would gather. I stood under flickering fluorescent lights, sleeves rolled, voice hoarse but unwavering. I showed them our new portfolio projections, explained every number in plain language. I shook every hand, looked every retiree in the eye. This is your money, I told them. I will guard it like I guard my own. One night, after a packed session at a local pub, an elderly man stopped me at the door. He wore a tweed cap and had an old union pin on his lapel. My wife's pension kept us alive when the factory closed, he said, voice rough with emotion. If you hadn't run that fund back then, we'd have lost everything. I gripped his hand. You won't lose it now. Not on my watch. But the pressure was relentless. Jeremy's people ramped up the legal harassment, filing nuisance suits to drain our resources and muddy the waters. Redwood's lawyers fought them tooth and nail, but I knew they were burning cash to keep us afloat. It had to end. One night, Aiden and I sat on the fire escape outside the co-working office, the city spread out below us in a wash of sodium lights and exhaust fumes. He won't stop, Aiden said. He's too proud, too scared you'll prove he was never worth the suit they put him in. I stared out at the night, then we finish it. We expose him. How? We follow the money, I said, my mind turning over the puzzle pieces. He didn't pivot the fund to high-risk assets for the thrill of it. He's skimming somewhere. There's always a leak. The next week was a blur of bank statements, wire transfer logs, and whispered conversations with old contacts inside Verdant. Gwen came through with the key, a series of internal emails showing Jeremy had funneled commissions through shell firms tied to his cousin's consultancy. It was buried under layers of plausible deniability, but to me, it was as clear as a red flag in a snowdrift. I called Louisa and Dominic to my flat late that night. The three of us sat hunched over my coffee table, the evidence spread out like a crime scene. We can go public, Dominic said. Leak it to the press, get regulators involved. I shook my head. Not yet. If we drop this bomb without proof that sticks, he'll spin it as desperation. We build the case. We bring it to the pensioners first. Let them see it with their own eyes. Louisa leaned back, her expression half exhausted, half admiring. You've turned this into a movement, Marisol. It was always a movement, I said quietly. It just needed a spark. In the days that followed, the tension inside Verdant's gleaming glass tower must have been suffocating. I could feel it from blocks away. Every day, a new pensioner signed their transfer paperwork. Every day, more employees whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Then the final piece fell into place. Gwen managed to get hold of an internal recording, Jeremy bragging at a private function about streamlining the old guard out and cashing out before the boom turns bust. His voice, smug and dripping with disdain for the very people who'd built the company he now leached from. We organized an open meeting at the same community hall where the first pensioners had pledged their trust. Folding chairs filled with familiar faces, retirees in cardigans, young parents with sleeping children on their laps, middle-aged managers who remembered when I was just that quiet woman in the corner office. When I played the recording, the room fell silent. The only sound was the hiss of the cheap speakers. I let it play twice, each word sinking in like a nail hammered into rotten wood. Then I stood in front of them, my voice steady as a steel beam. He thinks you're expendable. I don't. I never have. You gave your lives to build that company, your hours, your backs, your dreams. He's not just stealing your pensions. He's stealing your worth. A ripple of anger swept through the crowd, soft but gathering force, and then, one by one, people stood up, hands raised, pledges signed. Jeremy's last line of defense, fear, crumbled like wet paper. Aiden squeezed my shoulder. That's it, Marisol, you've won. But I knew better. The last move was always the hardest. It was never enough to win. You had to make sure the door stayed shut behind you. 3 days later, we filed a formal complaint with the financial regulator. The recording, the emails, the paper trail, it was all there, a noose of his own making. The story broke wide open. Verdant's CEO under investigation for pension mismanagement. The board, desperate to save face, suspended Jeremy before the ink on the headlines was dry. In the quiet after the storm, I sat alone in my flat, the weight of everything pressing down on me at last. I thought of my father, of the late nights in his garage, the hum of the old radio, the smell of oil and dust. I did it, Dad, I whispered into the silence. They called me too old, but I'm still here. The pensioners' fund was safe, stronger than it had been in years, and so was I. When I stepped outside into the winter night, I could almost feel him beside me. The old mechanic with grease under his nails, nodding in approval as his daughter built something that could not be broken. Let them say I was too old. Let them try to bury me again. Next time, I'd rise even stronger, because the storm never dies, it just changes hands. And tonight, the hands were mine. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of aftermath. Half victory lap, half battlefield triage. The press had turned on Jeremy with the kind of savage delight that only comes when a man so certain of his power gets caught out by his own arrogance. The board scrambled to save face, issuing statements about zero tolerance for misconduct and our unwavering commitment to our retirees. All empty words. The pensioners knew who had really fought for them, and it wasn't the men in the corner offices. I was back in our borrowed office, though by now we'd signed a lease on 2 floors in a modest brick building in the heart of the city. Nothing fancy, but it hummed with a kind of energy you couldn't fake. Gwen was there every morning before sunrise, organizing files with volunteers. Dominic had his own corner, phone glued to his ear, pulling in cautious but curious new partners. And Aiden. Aiden was everywhere, his sleeves perpetually rolled up, barking instructions into 3 different phones like a man half his age. I sat at my new desk, an old library table someone had donated, going through projections for the upcoming quarter. The pensioners' fund had to work now, not just as a defiant gesture, but as a living, breathing promise. We'd won the fight, but if we couldn't make good on our growth, the wolves would come back, and this time they'd tear the whole thing apart. Louisa knocked on the open door, leaning in with her reading glasses perched on her nose. Marisol, Channel 4 wants you for an interview. Prime time. You ready to be the people's pension hero? I smiled, but it was tight at the edges. Heroes are for bedtime stories. We're just people doing the work. She crossed the room, setting a gentle hand on my shoulder. That's exactly why they trust you. The interview went out live that night. I sat under hot studio lights, the city skyline gleaming behind me, and spoke not like some corporate figurehead, but like someone's daughter, someone's neighbor, someone who understood that a pension wasn't just a number. It was a roof, a meal, a chance for dignity at the end of a life spent giving everything to everyone else. When I got back to the office, a line of people waited by the reception desk, men and women with folders, questions, hope in their eyes. They wanted in. New clients, people who'd heard my story and wanted their money guarded by someone who saw them as more than an account balance. "Marisol, you've done something remarkable," Dominic said one night, handing me a cup of tea as we watched Gwen hang up the last of the day's paperwork. "You turned a pension fund into a community." "No," I said softly, "they did that. All I did was remind them they deserved it." But even as we found our footing, new challenges waited, like wolves in the dark. Jeremy might have been suspended, but he still had friends in places that liked the old way of doing business. Our legal team caught whispers of hostile counterbids, shell corporations trying to poach our biggest clients. Redwood was steady at our side, but even their patience had limits if we didn't deliver real returns. I woke each morning before dawn, staring at my father's old mug on the kitchen counter. It was a ritual now, 1 cup of black coffee before the storm. Each sip reminded me where I came from, a place of grit, hands-on work, promises made and kept. My father had built engines that lasted longer than the cars they were meant for. I would do the same with this fund. One Thursday, the first test came. A major green housing project we'd invested in hit a snag. Permits delayed, contractors pulling out, rumors of corruption at the municipal level. If it failed, it would bleed millions we couldn't afford to lose so soon. Aiden slammed a folder on my desk. "We need to pull out now, or we're going under with them." I shook my head. "No, we do what Verdun never did. We roll up our sleeves and fix it." "Marisol, that's not how these deals work." "Then we change how they work." That night, I stood in a half-finished housing development in the outskirts of the city, hard hat on, my coat whipping around me in the bitter wind. The project lead, a young woman named Freya, showed me blueprints by the light of a bare bulb. "They think this community won't come together," Freya said, her voice shaking. "They think the pensioners will walk away and let this place rot." "Then let's prove them wrong," I said. "What do you need?" "Investors who care about people, not just margins." "You've got them," I said, pointing back at the rows of dark windows waiting to be filled. "And you've got me." I spent the next 3 days in that building site, meeting with local officials, chasing down contractors who'd been bullied by bigger developers, calling in favors from old union contacts who remembered me from town halls years back. It was dirty, unglamorous work, but by the time I stood in that same dusty hallway on Sunday night, the project was back on track. Freya wept when I told her we'd cover the permits up front and renegotiate the timelines. When I got home that night, I collapsed on the couch, boots still caked in mud. My phone buzzed with a message from Aiden. "You were right, investors love it. Redwood wants more of that." I closed my eyes and let the exhaustion wash over me. This was what it meant to build something real, to get your hands dirty when the glossy suits would rather play golf. We hit our first quarterly targets the next month. Nothing spectacular, just steady, solid growth. Enough to quiet the critics, enough to prove the pensioners' fund wasn't a fluke. It was a promise kept. In the middle of that fragile momentum, Jeremy's final card landed like a stone through a window. A private investigator showed up at my flat, hired, no doubt, to find something, anything, to discredit me once and for all. He waited outside my building, polite but persistent. "Miss Trent, did you really think you'd come out of this spotless?" he asked, voice slick as oil. I looked him dead in the eye. "You're wasting your time." He smirked. "Everyone has secrets, Marisol." "Not me," I said, and I shut the door in his face. But it rattled me, more than I wanted to admit. That night, I sat up staring at the ceiling, the city humming outside my window. I thought about my father, about every time he'd been cheated out of fair pay, every time he'd come home with grease on his shirt and dignity in his eyes. He'd never bent. Neither would I. So I called Louisa, woke her at 3 in the morning, If they come for me, you take over, I said. Promise me. No, she said firmly. We stand together. They'll have to come for all of us. It wasn't the answer I wanted. It was better. The next morning, I found Gwen pinning a new poster to our office wall. It was a simple thing. An old photo of me from my early days at Verdant, standing with a line of retirees, the caption in bold, "She never forgot who she works for." I stood there, hand pressed to the paper, the hum of our bustling office around me, a movement, a rebellion, a home. That's what we'd built. I whispered to my father's memory, to the storm that had carried me this far, "I'm not done, not yet." And deep in my chest, the quiet storm rumbled back, ready to roar again. By the time the first warm spring air slipped through the cracks of our drafty new headquarters, the Pensioners Fund felt less like a fledgling idea and more like a living thing with its own heartbeat. Every day the phones rang with retirees, asking about new investments, local councils pitching community projects, even former Verdant employees sheepishly asking if they could shift their personal savings to us. We'd done the impossible, at least on paper, but surviving the storm was one thing, weathering the quiet that followed was another. I spent every dawn at my old wooden table, mug of black coffee in hand, running my fingers over spreadsheets until the numbers blurred. We needed to scale carefully. Too fast and we'd lose the trust we'd fought for. Too slow and we'd run out of momentum before our growth proved us right. Aiden dropped by one night unannounced, dropping a folder of thick printouts onto my table. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "Verdant is gearing up for a counter-offensive. They're merging with a rival asset manager. Twice our size. They're calling it, quote, consolidation for the future." I flipped through the pages. Smiling press releases. Polished headshots of Jeremy's replacement, someone younger but cut from the same cloth. "They'll try to muscle us out of the market," I said. Aiden nodded. "Big clients, big pension blocks. They'll say you're too small to guarantee security." I rubbed my temples. And yet they're the ones who nearly lost it all. "Doesn't matter," he said. "People forget faster than they remember." It felt like déjà vu. The same polished suits, the same empty promises, the same threat hidden behind polite smiles. But I wasn't the same woman they'd pushed aside all those months ago. They'd given me scars, and scars have their own kind of armor. So we leaned in. Instead of playing defense, we launched the Local Legacy Initiative, a program to funnel small portions of the pensioners' money into local businesses and co-ops. The returns were modest but steady. More importantly, they kept the money close to home. People saw where their savings went: new shops, community centers, schools. It gave them a stake in something real. The backlash came quick. Reckless, they called it. Sentimental. Jeremy's old cronies whispered that I was throwing people's money away on feel-good projects. But the numbers didn't lie. Month by month, our growth ticked up. Slow, steady, unshakable. Late one night, Dominic found me in my corner office. Lights off, except for the street lamps painting gold stripes across the walls. "You're wearing yourself thin," he said. "I'm fine," I lied. He sat across from me, folding his hands over his cane. "Do you ever think about life after this?" "After what?" I said, genuinely puzzled. He smiled sadly. "The fund, the fight, all of it." I thought about my father's garage, about the years I'd given to a company that once told me I was too old to be useful. "No," I said. "Because this is what I was made for." Dominic leaned back. "Then promise me you'll remember it's not just yours to carry. Louisa and I, this team, we're here for a reason." I wanted to tell him I understood. I wanted to tell him I knew how to let go, even for a minute. But the truth was, I didn't. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, the cracks in Verdant's polished facade began to show. The merger, rushed and hungry for headlines, was sloppy underneath. I knew the signs. Misaligned portfolios, redundant managers, whispering staff who smelled weakness. One evening, Gwen burst into my office, cheeks flushed. "You have to see this," she said, thrusting her tablet at me. It was a leaked email. Someone inside Verdant had had enough. The new CEO, Jeremy's golden boy, was exposed, bragging about streamlining pension obligations by tightening eligibility and reassessing risk thresholds. In plain English, more gambling with people's futures. We didn't need to spin it, we just showed the truth. Local newspapers ran the story. Pensioners organized new rallies. I stood on rain-slick steps in front of our modest headquarters, speaking to crowds that felt more like family than clients. They want you to believe you're just a number, I said, voice shaking in the cold wind. But you are the foundation they stand on. And if they can't see that, then we will build something better without them. Each time I spoke, I could feel the strength in their eyes. Not blind trust, earned faith. They were done being lied to. So was I. Behind the scenes, I pushed harder than ever. Meetings blurred into phone calls, strategy sessions ran past midnight. We started recruiting new partners. Small credit unions, regional banks, local councils. Piece by piece, the old machine that had once called me obsolete was now chasing our dust. One morning, I stood at my window as the city woke up beneath a rising sun. I could almost see my father there beside me, sleeves rolled, hands raw from work, telling me what he always had. Don't just fix the engine. Build it better than they ever thought possible. I turned to the scribbled chart on my wall, projections for the next 5 years. There were gaps, risks, no guarantees. But there was something else too, momentum, real human momentum. Aiden called that night, his voice rough but warm. You've done it, Marisol. Verdant's bleeding clients. Redwood wants to double down. They're ready to match us if we want to expand. Tell them yes, I said, but on our terms. We grow, but we never forget who we work for. As I hung up, I sank into my chair. The hum of the city drifted in through the cracked window. It smelled like rain and the promise of something more. I didn't know how long I'd keep doing this. Maybe I'd die doing it. Maybe I'd hand it over one day to Gwen or Louisa or someone not even born yet. But for now, the fight was mine. Too old? Maybe. But I'd learned something in the wreckage they left me to crawl through. Storms get stronger when they're quiet. And tonight, the quiet storm was roaring back to life. I barely remembered what my flat looked like, without stacks of files spread across the dining table, paper cups of coffee half drained and marked with names in black Sharpie. I had stopped counting how many nights I fell asleep with my laptop on my chest, spreadsheets glowing in the dark like watchful stars. The Pensioners Fund had grown from a rebellion to an institution in the making. Redwood's match funding secured our next phase, regional expansion. We weren't just guarding the futures of our first retirees anymore. We were drawing in entire communities who'd seen what we did and wanted in. I'd learned my lesson from Verdant: never become what you fight. So every new project we took on had to prove 2 things. It helped people, and it didn't eat away the fund's foundation. I turned down at least 3 flashy opportunities that promised double-digit returns but reeked of the same toxic shortcuts Jeremy once called dynamic leadership. One rainy Monday, Gwen burst into my office, her hair plastered to her forehead. You need to see this. She held out her phone. A social post, an old Verdant insider, claiming I was milking pensioners for political influence. They had dug up my name on a city housing grant application, twisting my push for community housing into some kind of personal cash grab. I laughed, short, sharp, humorless. So that's today's smear. Aiden, who'd been nursing a cold and looked like he'd rather be in bed, leaned over my shoulder. People are starting to tune it out, you know. They've tried so hard to paint you as corrupt that it's losing impact. Still, the seeds of doubt stung, so we fought it the only way we knew how: transparency. That afternoon, we hosted a live Quand A. I stood under the flicker of overhead lights, every file and number laid bare on a long table behind me. Ask me anything, I told the retirees sitting in metal chairs, the volunteers leaning against the back wall, the journalists live streaming every word. Ask me where every pound goes. Ask me who signs off. Ask me what I make. It's here, right in front of you. A woman with trembling hands stood up, voice thin but fierce. Are you still one of us, Marisol? Or have you gone corporate like the rest? I looked her dead in the eye. I am you, and this fund is yours. If I ever forget that, I expect you to throw me out." The room erupted in quiet, resolute applause. No PR stunt could buy that kind of faith. That night, after the volunteers had locked up, I sat on the creaking bench outside our building, coat pulled tight against the drizzle. I pulled my father's old mug from my bag. It was dented now, the ceramic chipped from so many late nights. I sipped black coffee gone cold and stared at the city lights. Too old. That word had been a curse. Now it was a crown. But even as we grew, the machine we'd once broken apart began stitching itself together in new shapes. Verdant's merger partners doubled down on poaching. They undercut our community investments with quick cash offers, luring some pensioners away with promises that sparkled but didn't hold up under scrutiny. Louisa caught me pacing the hall one night. "You can't save everyone," she said gently. "I know," I said, "but I can show them they never needed to be saved by people who don't care about them." One small city council, Bexley, became the turning point. A local co-op we'd backed for a senior housing retrofit was threatened with foreclosure when Verdant's new partners bought up the surrounding land, driving up costs. The co-op board was ready to sell and run. I drove there myself. Gwen came with me, a box of pastries on her lap as we crawled through traffic. "They don't want to see some big boss," she warned. "They want to see you." "Good," I said, "because I'm not a big boss." The hall was packed when we arrived. Low ceilings, a smell of old carpet and rain-damp coats. Pensioners in worn jackets, council reps who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks, single moms with kids clinging to their sleeves. I stood at the front, palms flat on a folding table. "They think they can choke us out. They think you'll run when it gets hard. But we don't run, we stand." Someone shouted from the back, "They have more money than you!" "Yes," I said, "and we have more reasons to win than they ever will." By the end of the night, the co-op board voted to stick with us. Redwood agreed to bridge the gap until the retrofit broke even. And the rumor mill spun the truth back at Verdant's new puppet masters. You can't outbid loyalty. Back at the office, Aiden was waiting with a grin. "You just turned a pension fund into a fortress." "It was always a fortress," I said. "They just didn't see the walls yet." But behind every little victory lurked the question that haunted me at 3 a.m. when the city was quiet. How long could I keep this up? Dominic sat me down one evening, his cane tapping softly against the scuffed floor. "One day you're going to have to pass this on, Marisol." "Not yet," I said. "We're not done." He nodded, eyes kind but unwavering. "I know, but promise me you'll teach them how to fight when you do." "I promise," I said. I left the office that night with the wind at my back, the rain spitting on my upturned collar. I thought of my father in his garage, grease under his nails, hammer in hand. He never retired. He just kept fixing things until his heart gave out. Maybe I would too. Too old? They'd said it like it was an ending. But for me, it was the beginning of a fight that would outlive every lie they ever told about who we were and what we could do. I looked up at the storm clouds rolling in over the city skyline. Let them come. The storm was mine now, and I was ready to roar. Every time I thought the worst of it was behind us, the next storm rolled in like it had been waiting just off the coast of my mind. We were no longer just fighting a company. We were fighting an idea. The idea that people like me were relics, that communities were numbers, that the old could be swept aside so the young and ruthless could strip the bones clean and call it progress. I kept my father's old mug on my desk now, a chipped reminder of the hours he'd spent hunched over carburetors and battered engines that everyone else had written off. Some nights, when the building was empty and the echo of my own footsteps reminded me how far I'd come alone, I'd wrap my hands around it, close my eyes, and remember why I was still standing. The Pensioners Fund had survived its first year. The headlines called it a miracle. I called it unfinished work. Aiden sat cross-legged on my office floor one Thursday evening, papers spread around him like fallen leaves. The Bexley retrofit is ahead of schedule. The co-op is signing on 2 more projects. Redwood wants to take the local legacy model to the north. I rubbed my temples. And Verdant? He shrugged. Bleeding. They're paying out hush settlements to keep the worst of the merger backlash quiet. But they're still big enough to hurt us if they find a weakness. Then we don't give them one, I said. We show every retiree, every council, every single stakeholder that we are the storm they can't outrun. In the next weeks, that became our motto. Gwen made flyers with a line of pensioners in hard hats breaking ground on a new green energy site. We are the storm. Simple. Honest. A rebellion turned rallying cry. But it wasn't just slogans that kept us alive. It was the long nights I spent at town halls. The hours I gave to phone calls with pensioners terrified their savings might still vanish if we stumbled. It was the late-night strategy sessions with Louisa and Dominic and Aiden, where we weighed every investment like a surgeon weighing a scalpel. It was the nights I came home, kicked off my shoes, and sat on my couch staring at my father's old mechanic's photo, wishing I could hear his voice just once more. Too old. They still whispered it, like an insult they couldn't let go. It clung to every blog post that mocked my hair, my tired eyes, the age spots on my hands, and every time, it only hardened my resolve. They still didn't understand that they'd built this fire when they called me done. Then came the lawsuit. Verdant's last card, a sweeping legal claim that our local legacy initiative violated proprietary investment strategies. It was nonsense. Community bonds weren't exactly a trade secret. But the threat was enough to scare smaller councils and retirees who'd fought too hard to lose it all in court. Louisa slammed the door to my office when she told me, "They're trying to starve us out with legal fees." "They won't," I said, but my chest ached all the same. We were strong, but not infinite. Aiden suggested we settle. "Just to buy time," he said, pacing the threadbare rug. "Admit no wrongdoing, but let them save face so they walk away." I shook my head. They don't want a settlement. They want to smear our name with the word settlement. They'll spin it as guilt. "Then what?" Gwen asked. "We fight in court? That could take years." "No," I said, a smile creeping across my face. "We fight in the open." Within 24 hours, we filed our entire case, every document, every email, every proof of independent development, into the public record. We hosted a press conference in the parking lot of our headquarters. I stood there, no suit, no teleprompter, just me and a stack of files taller than my father's old toolbox. "If they want to fight, they'll get it," I told the cameras, "but they'll get it in the daylight." Verdant's lawyers blustered, but the tide turned. Pensioners rallied. Councils held their ground. Redwood publicly pledged legal support. Dominic, cane tapping the pavement, spoke to every reporter who'd listen. Marisol Trent is what this city was built on. People who don't bend when the wind howls. And oh, did it howl. But when the dust settled, Verdant backed off. They dropped the suit quietly, hoping the noise would fade. It didn't. Gwen leaked the story to every local rag we could find. They tried to break her, the headlines read, and she broke them instead. For the first time in months, I slept a full night. When I woke, the sun was warm on my face, the hum of the city gentle, almost kind. Louisa found me at my desk that morning, hair still unbrushed, fingers wrapped around my father's old mug. "It's yours now," she said. "Really yours." "It always was," I said softly. "They just didn't know it." Later that week, I visited the first housing co-op we'd ever funded. The retirees there had built a rooftop garden with their dividends, flowers blooming in wooden boxes, bees drifting lazily in the sun. An old woman named Eileen pressed a paper cup of lemonade into my hands. "You didn't have to fight for us like that," she said. "Yes," I said, smiling at the hum of bees, the scent of new life. "Yes, I did. Too old. Too stubborn. Too much." They'd called me those things like they were chains. But each one was just another link in the armor I wore now. A shield built from every name they tried to bury me under. And when the next storm came, and I knew it would, I'd stand at its eye, ready to fight again. Because that's what you do when the world tells you you're done. You roar back, "Not yet." I used to think the worst battles would end with some neat final victory, like a door slamming shut behind the enemy. No more cracks for the wind to whistle through. But the truth is, storms never really end. They just change shape. The pensioners' fund was stable now, strong even. The local legacy initiative was a model that other cities wanted to mimic. Redwood increased their stake, giving us more breathing room than we'd ever dared hope for that first trembling month. And yet, every morning when I stood at the window with my father's old mug in hand, I could feel the next wave building on the horizon. The world doesn't give you peace just because you've earned it. It tests you to see if you still deserve it. It started with the new government proposal, a bill that would centralize pension oversight into a massive national scheme. On paper, it sounded fair. Streamline inefficiencies, protect the vulnerable. But I'd read enough fine print to know when someone was reaching for the strings. They wanted the independent funds. Ours included, folded back into the same cold machine we'd torn ourselves free from. Aiden slammed the bill down on my desk, the paper crumpling under his palm. This would gut everything we've built. Louisa sat across from me, glasses low on her nose. They're framing it as protecting retirees from mismanagement. You know what they mean. They mean us, I said. They mean me. We ran numbers, scenarios, impact reports. If it passed, we'd lose our autonomy, our community investments would be slashed to fit a government mold, and all the people who trusted us would be shuffled back into the same faceless labyrinth they'd fought to escape. They can't be serious, Gwen whispered when she joined us that evening. They'd really do this to people who've already lost so much? They would, I said. And they will, unless we remind them who they're dealing with. So we did what we always did when the storm gathered. We got loud. Town halls turned into rallies. Pensioners who'd once been too shy to raise a hand now stood at microphones, telling stories that made the local news crews cry behind their lenses. Families who'd never thought twice about where their parents' money went now marched with us. Signs held high. Our futures, our hands. The morning the bill hit Parliament, I sat in a cheap hotel room a few blocks away, hair pinned up, suit pressed, my father's mug clutched so tight I thought it might crack. Louisa adjusted my collar before we left. You ready? Always, I said. The hearing room smelled of old carpet and stale coffee. Politicians droned on about fiduciary standards and risk pooling, all while the people they were about to fold into the system sat in the back row, backs straight, eyes sharp. Eileen, from the rooftop garden, squeezed my hand. Say it plain, Marisol, they'll hear you. When my turn came, I stepped up to the mic. I didn't bring slides or notes. I brought the truth. My name is Marisol Trent. For 30 years, they called me reliable, loyal, indispensable, until I was too old to matter. They told me to step aside, that I was in the way of progress. But what they didn't count on was that I'd build something stronger than they could ever tear down. I glanced at the rows behind me, faces lined with years and hope. You can call it inefficiency, I call it trust. You can call it sentimental, I call it survival. You want to protect pensioners? Stop treating them like numbers. Silence stretched through the room. Aiden caught my eye from the back, chin lifted, a flicker of a grin. He knew I was far from finished. I've sat at those tables you think are so secure. I've watched men gamble people's lives on risky bets and call it innovation. You think a national scheme will make people safer? Ask the ones who've had to choose between food and heat when their payments fell short, because someone forgot they existed. A murmur rippled through the audience. I let it grow. We are not inefficient. We are invested, deeply, personally, fiercely. We are the storm you thought you could outrun. And if you try to swallow us back into your machine, you'll find out what happens when the people you forgot remember who they are. When I stepped down, Eileen patted my shoulder. You never let us down. Back at HQ, the phones rang non-stop. Volunteers fielded calls from other independent funds, asking how we'd done it, how we'd built so much loyalty so fast. Aiden looked exhausted, eyes red from staring at spreadsheets and legal drafts, but he couldn't stop smiling. They underestimated you again, he said, perched on the edge of my desk. They keep doing that. And they keep losing, I said. It wasn't over yet. The bill would crawl through committees, get rewritten, get fought over behind closed doors. But for the first time in my life, I knew that when they tried to close the door on us, it wouldn't just be me holding it open. It would be thousands of hands braced against the weight. That night, Louisa brought a bottle of cheap sparkling wine. We drank it in plastic cups at the window, the city lights blinking like a promise. "Remember when they called you just an analyst?" she said, tapping her cup to mine. "I was," I said, "until they made me more." She laughed. "What now, Marisol?" I looked out at the night. "Now we teach them. We show every young analyst, every retiree who thinks they've lost their voice, every council and co-op that they're stronger than they've ever been told. Too old." It echoed in my mind, a ghost of a name they'd given me to break me. But I wore it now like a banner. Too old to bend. Too old to be bought. Too old to forget who I was fighting for. And tomorrow, when the next storm came, I'd stand ready at its heart, sleeves rolled, hands steady. Because when you've weathered every storm they could throw, you stop fearing the thunder. You become it. I woke before dawn the day they announced the bill had been withdrawn. The city was still dark outside my window, the hum of distant buses and the rattle of delivery trucks, the only hints that the world was already moving. I stood there for a long while, my father's old mug warm in my hands, letting the silence settle over me like a well-worn coat. The pensioners' fund was safe. Our independence, what we'd built, what they'd tried to strip away, had survived another storm, not by luck or by mercy, but because thousands of people who'd once thought they were voiceless had stood up and roared. Gwen found me at my desk that morning, staring at the lines of a new draft on my screen. "You're not stopping, are you?" she asked, setting a cup of tea down next to my cold coffee. "No," I said. "I've learned that the fight never ends. You just choose what you're willing to stand for when it comes back around." She smiled and sank into the chair across from me, hugging her sweater around her shoulders. "We've been getting letters, pensioners from other cities, independent workers, nurses, factory crews. They want to know how they can do it too, how they can take back what's theirs." I reached for one of the letters she slid across the desk, handwritten on lined paper, the ink smudged at the edges. "You don't know me," it read, "but you gave me hope. You made me believe I'm more than a number on someone's spreadsheet." Hope. That was the real engine we'd built. Dominic arrived later, tapping his cane on the floor as he walked a slow circle around the office. "I remember when you first pitched the buyout," he said, voice softer than usual. "You had this fire in your eyes, but you were so tired. I thought you might break." "I almost did," I said, tracing the rim of my mug. "But you and Louisa, Aiden, Gwen, they didn't know what they were building when they called me too old. They didn't know they were giving me a reason to stand." Louisa appeared in the doorway with 2 bags of pastries and a fresh stack of community proposals tucked under her arm. "They want you to come speak at the National Summit," she said, waving off Dominic's attempt to help with her papers. "Other funds, union groups, even some of those big corporate pension plans who said you were a liability." "What do they want to hear?" I asked, only half joking. "They want to know how you did it," Gwen said, "how we did it. We tell them the truth," I said, "that there's no shortcut, that you have to show up when it's raining and no one's listening, that you guard people's dreams like they're your own." The room fell quiet for a moment. I looked at these people, my family now more than my colleagues, and wondered what my father would think if he could see me standing in this battered old building, surrounded by piles of paperwork and a garden of hope growing from the concrete. Aiden came in last, his hair sticking up in every direction. "You still planning to do all this yourself?" he asked, arching an eyebrow as he dropped a fresh printout on my desk. "No," I said, "not anymore." We'd started something bigger than any of us, and it deserved to last long after I was gone. I spent the next weeks building the new mentorship plan, young analysts shadowing the older pensioners who'd once been called deadweight. Retired factory foremen teaching bright-eyed graduates how to balance risk and human need in the same breath. Gwen spearheaded the education fund. Louisa pushed for local councils to adopt our governance model. And Dominic, in his quiet way, tied it all together with the stubborn wisdom of a man who'd seen empires rise and fall and knew the only thing that outlived them all was community. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself back at my kitchen table, a single lamp casting soft gold light over the same battered spreadsheets I'd once thought might bury me. But now, they felt different. Less like chains, more like roots. One evening, I stood in the garden at the Bexley Co-op, where the pensioners had built new benches among the rooftop flowers. Eileen sat beside me, her cardigan sleeves rolled up as she showed a young volunteer how to prune the tomato plants. "You know," she said, leaning close so only I could hear, "when you first stood up there, I didn't believe you'd last. I'd heard too many promises." "And now?" I asked. She smiled, a deep warmth in her eyes. "Now, I believe we will." The wind carried her words away across the garden. I looked at the horizon, the city rising and falling in soft lines, the new towers glinting like distant lighthouses. I thought of my father, sleeves rolled, hands raw, telling me that engines only run if you tend them with love, as well as oil and sweat. I would tend this one for as long as I had breath in my lungs, and when I could no longer hold the wrench, I'd make sure the hands I passed it to knew what it meant. Too old? Let them say it, let them believe it means weak or spent or small. We'd shown the world what too old really means. It means steady, it means rooted. It means we don't break when the wind howls. We bend, we roar, and we rise again. So the next time the storm comes, and it will, I'll be waiting at its eye, sleeves rolled, father's mug warm in my hands, heart steady with the truth they tried so hard to bury. They said I was too old to matter. But I was always too old to fail. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.